Welcome to the Broncos podcast with Troy Renck. I am your host, Troy Renck, columnist for the Denver Post. I am thrilled again to be joined by my colleagues to go over the draft. It was a surprising draft. You can see it from the headline. I was as surprised as anyone the way it shook out. But I got Parker Gabriel here and Luca Evans to break it down. They were on the ground, on the floor over there at Dove Valley for 3 days. We all were, but they were doing the work of champions, breaking down every pick, keeping that draft tracker going, doing multiple stories. I had the easy job of doing a couple columns, but it was a surprising draft. Did the Broncos do enough offensively to make that next step forward in the AFC West and the AFC in general? I think that is, for me, the lingering question as we leave the draft. And really, the last roster stuff's kind of over outside a few contract extensions, and maybe you add a running back in free agency. But the reality is, this is kind of who they are now. Did they do enough? We're going to break that all down with Parker and Luca right after the break. Have you been injured in a car wreck or hurt at work? What are you waiting for? Give my friends at Hoggatt Injury Law a call. Their motto, with us, it's personal. That's because it is. I've known Darby Hoggatt forever. We traveled the country watching our boys play baseball. We became good friends. Many of Darby's clients become his good friend. You don't even have to pay Darby up front. If your case goes as planned, Darby will be the one writing checks to you. So again, if you've been hurt in a car wreck or injured at work, do me a favor, call Darby. That's 1-833-HOGGATT. That's 1-833-HOGGAT, or visit the website at hoggattlaw.com. Welcome back to the Broncos pod. Again, I'm Troy Renck from the Denver Post, and I am now joined by my two terrific colleagues, Parker Gabriel and Luca Evans, to break down the Broncos draft. We had them in before to preview it, and it went off so well. I said, you know what? Why should I broke down the first-round pick of Jahdae Barron on Friday, but when I looked at it last night and yesterday, I'm like, why would I want to go through all these picks when I have two guys at my work that are much smarter than I am that are following this way more closely? So, Parker, Luca, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Troy.
It seems like it's been a long time since we all spent 40 hours over 3 days together over there at Dove Valley.
Too much time.
It's not as fun without like we used to do it in the field house. You just had more room to kind of walk around and like a different vibe. And that atrium's really cool. Like if you're walking in to see it for like 15 minutes, it's not really set up to do an all-day draft coverage presser. I give the Broncos credit. They're kind of stuck because of the construction, but it is a weird deal that it's just, you kind of feel like you're contained in there. And it was an odd draft. I'll just start there. I thought they were going to go running back or tight end in the first round. I've been very vocal about that. I'm not a general manager. I'm not a scout. I just was looking at their roster, at what Bo Nix did. I did not expect Jahdae Barron. I want to hear your guys first on the first round choice of the cornerback. And I'm not killing it. I understand it because of the value. But what were your thoughts now as we get a little bit removed from it? We'll start with you, Parker. They go corner in first round. I can't find a mock that exists that had them taking Barron in the first round.
Yeah, it was like for the universe of mock drafts, I think, on Jahdae Barron. And I think it's twofold on that. One, I mean, I think, corner was sort of a sneaky need. Maybe even we talked about that last week before the draft. I don't think, obviously, not many people, present company included, thought they'd go that way in the first round. Also, though, I mean, I don't think there were a lot of mocks that had Barron around still at 20. I mean, right. He just was regarded as one of the better players in the class. I think when I went through the sort of futile exercise of trying to put together a first-round mock, I had him at number 13 to Miami. There's a lot of teams that need defensive back help. And I think the thing that's interesting is you could argue the Broncos aren't really one of them, but they're taking a long-term view of this. And Sean Payton, I think he sort of stuck true to what he said in the pre-draft news conference, which was, let's not pass up the crystal for a blender just because we need a blender. And that's Jahdae Barron. I mean, he's one of the best players in the class. He can do a lot. And so, where does he play right away? Is he the starting nickel over Jaquan McMillan? Is he depth outside? I mean, these things have a way of working themselves out. You play so many snaps in sub. Injuries are a reality in the NFL. And he's a premium talent. So he's going to find his way onto the field, early, I would imagine, one way or another. And then if Riley Moss goes down again, or if Pat missed a couple games or whatever, certainly if Jaquan got hurt, then all of a sudden you're looking at it and saying like, wow, here's this premium guy we have to play a very important position. But obviously, Troy, I can understand. I mean, I had him picking running back too, so I can understand the fact that it was a little bit of a surprise when it was like, wait, who is it? It's Jahdae Barron. Wow. Okay. Okay.
I was
rewrite.
It was an audible gasp of who in the media room, myself included. You did a deep dive on it, Luca. You found out that, that obviously this guy is best friends with Matthew McConaughey. You got a quote from Matthew is, all right. I mean, it wasn't all right. I wanted a running back, but tell me a little bit more about what we should know about Jahdae Barron.
Yeah, Troy, I remember when you when we heard that pick and you went, oh boy, I gotta time to write this column on a first round corner. But no, Jahdae Barron, I think what stands out from a deeper sense for him is, and we got a taste of it, in his first initial presser, is just kind of the character that he carries himself with, the maturity. He was a 5-year kid at Texas who just got better every single year. He invited Texas equipment managers and trainers and former high school counselors and teachers to his draft party. Basically does it all for his mom, Taconia. And I think the Broncos really liked the character there. I mean, from a beyond football standpoint. And then what he does on the football field, I think, as you kind of look retrospectively at the pick, it just starts to make more and more sense. Like Parker said, maybe corner was kind of a sneaky need for them. And now they have a guy who can really elevate an already pretty solid secondary, just in terms of his versatility. He played basically every slot last year, at Texas, and over the course of his career, outside corner. He played dime, star, he played some safety. He, would play in the box, outside of the box. He did everything, and he, had a goal to mentally master all of those positions. And on top of that, he did it all for Vance Joseph's cousin, Terry Joseph, at Texas. So makes a lot of sense. The Broncos connection is there when you think about it and piece it together. And I think, I think that pick is a pretty solid one, especially when you look at the talent that was available to them at 20. Would they reach, quote unquote, maybe on Travion Henderson there as a running back? Obviously, Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren already are off the board. So it's like, do you go to a receiver? And I think, ultimately that was a pretty solid pick for them at 20.
Yeah, as it was playing out beyond the, it was like going through surgery without any anesthesia. We're listening to the Shadur Sanders diatribe as the first round's going on. But the reality was, I thought they might make a move up for Tyler Warren. I asked Peyton afterward. He said that wasn't under consideration. It's hard for me to believe they didn't make a call there as Warren slipped and Colton Loveland went to the Bears at 10. That was a little bit of a surprise. Not a shock, but surprise. But we knew they needed a running back, Parker. And everyone's like, RJ Harvey, you're missing it. And again, I saw him play once last year, just once. That was the CU game. Part of that game was played in like a tropical storm. So it was a little weird. And CU played, frankly, might have been its best defensive game of the year against Gus Malzahn. But if they wanted Harvey so much, they traded back from 51. We were acting like they knew all along it was Harvey. Okay, pump the brakes here a little bit. I like Harvey, but I also don't know how quickly can he transition into the passing game, because you guys have written about it. I wrote about it during the Super Bowl. I mean, Sean Payton throws it more on first down than anybody in the league. The running back has to be part of the passing game. So it's not just that he can break tackles and be explosive, which it looks like he should be. Parker, what can we expect from RJ Harvey? Is he a guy that can come in and be not clear number one, but like he's getting the most carries? He's not going to have a bell cow. But what are our expectations? What are fair expectations for RJ Harvey?
Yeah, I think that's a fair expectation. I mean, he's got to win the job. Obviously, that's the same conversation with all these rookies and really any young player. But yeah, I mean, I think the things that Sean Payton and George Payton, sort of fell in love with RJ Harvey, they said he might have had the best vision in the class. That's not something that you can watch it and get a feel for a guy that has good feel if you're just a, reporter sitting on his couch watching tape or whatever. But they went deep on RJ Harvey. They fell in love with him. And I think I think it's fair to say, and they even said in their own way, it's not like they said, oh, this is the best back in the class. Sometimes I think we talk about the pre-draft stuff and then we don't always listen to the things that we say about what the approach should be, right? Like we said all along, this is a really good class. You're looking for the guy that fits you and that you think has 3-down ability. Those are sort of like the categories. And so like they obviously think RJ Harvey fits them. They also, like everybody, they loved Ashton Genty. They knew it was not realistic that they were going to be able to get him. And then they George Payton said they considered a running back in the first round that would have probably been in a trade back scenario. That, we're told pretty straightforward. That was Travion Henderson from Ohio State. And so, like, I think the thing about it is, like, they could have drafted Omarion Hampton. He was there at 20. They chose not to. I'd sort of heard loosely, like, in recent weeks that they liked him, but not enough to take him at 20. They liked Travion Henderson more, not enough to take him at 20. And so they took a guy that they thought can elevate their defense, and they knew that they had somebody that they'd fallen in love with, even if he wasn't exactly the same caliber of prospect as Ashton Genty or maybe even Travion Henderson. They had a guy they figured would be there in the second round in RJ Harvey. And yeah, I mean, you can say, well, if they loved him so much, they just would have taken him at 51. That's a calculated risk to move back, and we'll talk about this later, I'm sure. But the two trade backs from 51 to 57 and then to 60, that's ultimately how they ended up with Savon Jones at the end of the third round, the defensive lineman from LSU. So like, it'll be an all's well that ends well story if RJ Harvey hits. But like, obviously, if he doesn't, you'll look back on it and say like, man, Travion Henderson's pretty good, or maybe they should have taken, Hampton. He's killing them twice a year in the division or whatever. That's part of it with the draft. There's always room for second guessing. But I actually think that the process by which they ended up with RJ Harvey was a pretty savvy one, all things considered.
Yeah, I do think there's a chance that this draft, in terms of what they did offensively, could be a referendum because of the way the AFC West played out, with the Raiders getting Genty and Beck and Omarion Hampton for the Chargers, and the Chiefs take basically three guys, a tackle, a couple of receivers. So did the Broncos, kind of sensing pass prevention and defense, did they make the calculated right gamble here? I'm going to ask you about Savon Jones. Luca, I think you saw him in person last year in Vegas, right? Playing against USC. If I remember when this pick happened, you liked it. What is it that intrigues you about him? Is this a rotational piece? What does he bring to the table, do you think, that can get him on the field? It's not always easy as a defensive lineman to get snaps in the NFL. I mean, a lot of those guys end up inactive about half the games. What do you like about him?
Yeah, absolutely. I did see him last year covering USC, their first game of the year against LSU, and he just stood out in terms of his physicality. The size is obviously great for a college player. I'll pivot just briefly back to the RJ Harvey discussion before I pick this up, but George Payton said, at a press conference that they watched RJ Harvey run kind of the full route tree at his pro day and catch all. It really liked how he profiled kind of in the passing game. So as much as we've been talking about that kind of joker back that can play in space, not to bring that term back up again, but they clearly see, I think, RJ Harvey is that kind of potential. He ran a 4.4. He's got the profile for that. So, but back to Savon, I do think, he made it clear when he talked to us that he sees himself as a versatile guy. He's not just a, defensive end. He's not just an edge rusher. He can play on the interior. I think that particular piece of his profile might take some time to develop. I think off the top of my head, he's about 6'6", 280, might need to put on a little bit of weight in order to kind of shift to the interior a little bit more consistently. But I think the Broncos really emphasized, when you look at, their overall kind of defensive haul from this draft, versatility. You see it in Jahdae Barron. You see it in Savon Jones, as guys that can kind of play a variety of different spots at their, respective kind of position group. So I think that was definitely a clear sort of emphasis for Denver. And I do think, Savon Jones has the ability to make an impact early, but overall, when you look at Denver's defensive line, there's not a ton of need for immediate help. And I think there's also the potential that, hey, this is a contingency pick when you look at the amount of guys that are up for contract extensions.
Yeah, I think Parker brings up a point where Jade Barron, like you play the long game. I definitely think they're playing the long game here because of John Franklin Myers with Savon Jones, that it's just hard to see them paying Myers. Eventually, you can't pay everyone. It's just the way the NFL works. But we'll talk about one more pick in depth and then kind of jump around to what you guys think was the best pick, biggest sleepers. The draft class, they have Pat Bryant, and we're going to get to him. And then in the 4th round was Q Robinson. The 6th round, the punter. I know that was a favorite of Luca, Jeremy Crawshaw. And then, of course, the converted basketball player from Utah, Caleb It's Loner, right?
Yep.
Loner.
Yeah, Loner.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a loner. He's going to be on the practice squad. He'll probably be a project that we'll just see. Every time I hear, oh, it's Antonio Gates did it and Jimmy Graham. They're Hall of Famers. Like, okay, like what's when Tua came out? He's just like Drew Brees. Is he? Is he really? Like, let's not compare guys to Hall of Famers. It's typically the wrong way to go. But I understand where they went with the pick. But let's go Pat Bryant. When I heard him, I saw him play in the Big Ten. I know you watch, Parker, a lot of Big Ten.
That's right.
Covered it. You like a lot of things about it. When I first saw him play, I think I remember watching him last year. I'm like, man, that guy looks a little bit like Tim Patrick. Kind of grinds, he's tough, and he doesn't drop the ball. But a 4.6 140 in the top 75 picks, that's almost unprecedented. In like the last 20 years, I think Jeff Legwall, our friend from ESPN, was saying might have been Anquan Boldin, the last guy, a receiver drafted at that speed. Now listen, I said this in my column. Andrew Mason has said this to me, and I agree. Sean Payton likes his receivers and running backs and tight ends a lot more than we do. And he's done this for a long time. But Pat Bryant, what is your overall reaction? It's like I like a lot of his traits, but we start saying, oh, it could be Michael Thomas. I don't see that. Not at a 4.61. It just feels like we're kind of stretching it a little bit here, liking this pick maybe even more than I was surprised. And not shocked, but I just surprised a little bit. What are your thoughts, Parker, on Bryant?
Yeah. I watch a lot of Big Ten football. You watch some Big Ten football, and Luca covered the storied Big Ten program, USC, last year. So
Sorry, did not play Illinois though, but
Pat, I mean, it was a surprising pick, right? Like there was a bunch of receivers in that part of the draft that I really liked. I didn't think, and again, I'm not an expert, but I didn't think that was, it was like Jalen Royals was sitting there, and Luca and I think we're talking about like, oh man, he would look pretty good here at 74. Maybe a little surprised even that he's around there as you're getting into the 3rd round. And then Kansas City took him naturally at the beginning of day 3. So I mean, the thing about it is like Sean Payton, not only does he like his receivers and running backs in particular more, I think, than the public at large, but he has a type when it comes to receivers. And I think, there's times where I think that he thinks they have enough speed at receiver. I mean, Court can run. He's not like a take the top off guy, but I thought last year Cortland looked as fast as he has in his career, probably, even though he's 28. And then you've got guys to fill that role in Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin. And so, I mean, that's not to say that you take a guy who's like slow. And obviously Pat Bryant, the 4.61 is garner some attention. I think when you look at it, like down the field, does he separate from defensive backs? I mean, maybe not a lot, but he's good off the line of scrimmage. He runs crisp routes, and he's got pretty good feel in the middle of the field, I think. And that's really like Sean Payton. He loves throwing the ball over the middle of the field. He loves the big over route and the shallow cross and all that stuff. And, we saw Bo Nix play pretty well with all of that. So a guy who's going to be, good at the catch point, strong hands, and has a feel for sort of operating in the second level, like, that's what he was looking for. And Pat Bryant's going to be a pretty good blocker, I think, on the perimeter. And so like he fits the mold. Do they have to take him at 74? I don't know. I was reading Mike Silver this morning from embedded in the Jacksonville draft room. Pat Bryant's from Jacksonville, and they wanted to take him. But Mike Silver wrote they weren't going to take him nearly that early. So probably a player, I bet if you asked around the league, a player that a lot of teams liked and not a lot of teams thought would go in the 3rd round.
Yeah, I think that's, again, I never say you overdraft unless you overdraft a guy like he doesn't make your team.
Right.
As long as he fits. Like it's all about team and scheme. So if he comes in and he fits, he's a tough guy. He plays some of that Tim Patrick role. It does tell me that the Peyton has a big expectation on Devon Vele.
Yeah.
That going into this season, he has high hopes for him. So
But don't you think? But there's also a chance though that Pat Bryant and Devon Vele step on each other's toes a little bit.
That's it. They're the same guy in some ways, right? Like and it took Vele how long, Pat Parker, to get going. Remember, he had like a nice game, then he was inactive, and then like was he hurt? Well, we're not sure he's hurt.
Yeah, they said he was perfectly healthy a week after he fractured his ribs. So, and then he was a healthy scratch for 4 weeks. So,
right. So maybe it was all late. It was just a weird. And remember we dealt with this with Mims last year that, 2 years ago, like he starts to come on and then all of a sudden the better he plays, the less he played. Like, what is going on? That's why when they start talking about this rookie's going to do this and he's going to do this, I'm like, I got to see it.
Yeah.
Sean Payton's history with rookies is to really bring them along slowly, aside from Bo Nix.
Luca's far too young for this reference, but he actually knows ball though, so maybe he'll. But Jerry Sloan, the old Utah Jazz coach, I'm sure a lot of guys listen to this, but for some reason, it's Jerry Sloan that sticks in my mind, who said the best thing about rookies is they become second-year players.
Right.
And that's like Sean, like traditionally has taken that approach to some degree. Now he cracked the window open a little bit last year, especially with Bo, but with some other guys too. But you saw it with Marvin Mims as a second-year guy in 23. Saw it with Audric Estime last year. Vele earned the trust pretty fast. I think like once he was back from the rib injury, like he was back to sort of like normal usage pretty quickly. But yeah, I mean, I wrote this after the draft, Troy. Like I think in order for them to get where they want to go this year, like they need at least a couple of these guys to contribute right away. And, that's not always a guarantee, obviously, but that to me, that's like where it shakes out. And, Pat Bryant, probably not first on that list, obviously Barron and Harvey, and then the punter. Like if those three guys all make an impact on your team, that's pretty good stuff. But obviously they could use another one from the group, sort of, coming up and playing a sizable role too.
And it looks like Luca Q is the linebacker looks like a special teams guy to me, at least initially. He's undersized, right? But I want to go right to the punter because you were on this podcast. I think you said it half seriously. Maybe it was more seriously than I thought. But you wanted a punter, right?
Listen. If there's one thing that I'll take from these first couple of months on the beat, it's that I nailed the punter prediction. So that's
somebody cares.
That's all that I care about. No, I mean, I think realistically, it makes sense. Like when you look at, up and down the roster in terms of where they were at that point, there's not many holes to fill. They're not going to go into next season with Matt Hack, who I don't think, had punted, had been a starting punter since I think 22 with the Colts. I don't think they were, all along going to go into next season with him as the starter. It would make sense and there were basically two draft-worthy guys in this draft, Crawshaw and James Burnett out of Alabama. I know they like both, but Crawshaw did, I think 46 yards a punt over his time at Florida. I'm not going to pretend like I know the world about punting, but you got to assume that in a humid climate down there in Florida, he's going to have a heck of a time coming up to the mountains and the hang time there. So I can't believe that I'm getting into the intricacies of punting within my first couple months on the beat, but I do think he was a good value for the Broncos in the 6th round. You think maybe, I think one of the bigger questions from this draft, or maybe kind of the outlying need, is, hey, should they have taken maybe a tight end who can play right away next to Evan Ingram? Or I remember, Parker was talking on last week's podcast about taking a lot of snaps as a blocker, what have you. Obviously, Caleb Lohner in the 7th round is not going to be that guy. He's more of a developmental fit, box out guy in the red zone. So that is kind of a lingering question, I think, when you look at the rest of the draft. But clearly Evan Ingram's going to take, he's going to be a pass catching guy. And then, they'll turn back to that room of Troutman and Kroll and what have you for supplemental help there.
Yeah, I don't dislike, crazy as it sounds, the cross shot pick. Riley Dixon was just too inconsistent for me. At altitude, you should be one of the best punting teams, best punt coverage teams. They just got to be a little better there. It's not like Riley was bad. He would have games where you're like, man, this guy should be an all-pro, and then he'd have a couple of games where you're like, my word, he's just inconsistent is the word I would use. Now, cross shot, to have to do it as a rookie, there's pressure, real pressure there. But you did bring up a great point. And as much as we talk about running back, I will admit the fact they didn't get a tight end that could come in and challenge for playing time surprised me because of the fact and this was my mentions in my social media life. You're an idiot. They've got Evan Ingram. They've solved it. And I'm like, he's 31 coming off a shoulder injury. I love Evan Ingram. I love everything about that signing. But you're acting like he's going to be the Cal Ripken of tight ends moving forward and play every snap. He's not. And if he gets hurt, we go right back to the room of Troutman, Kroll, and Atkins, all good guys. It's not personal. Just the production from that position, Parker, has not been great. Is there something else out there? Is this Sean, again, projecting Kroll taking a big step forward, Atkins moving forward? Mainly, it would have to be Kroll, really, if you look out at profiles, because Troutman is who he is at this point in his career. Solid piece, Mr. Reliable. You can trust to do the right thing. But is this maybe a little bit more of a hedged bet on Kroll if Ingram has to miss a few games?
Yeah, well, especially if Evan Ingram misses time, then yeah, you're sort of back to where you were last year. I mean, there's free agents out there still, but there's not. I'm looking at the list right now. I mean, Jordan Akins is 33, Nick Vanette is 32, Gerald Everett. I mean, there's some guys out there, but Mercedes Lewis, or if you're looking for more of the blocking type, to me, it's like at this point, you're probably just looking at, Troutman carrying on in the role that he served the last couple of years as sort of your base down guy, and then just playing more two tight end, really, with Evan Ingram being, functionally just a receiver. And so to me, that looks like where it's at. And if we're talking about among a lot of things that we got wrong about the draft, like if you want to talk about things that I think we were on the right track with, it didn't feel to me, and I think maybe we talked about this last week. Certainly we talked about it over there during the draft and wrote it and all that, is like, it just didn't seem like where the value was in this board that they were going to go running back, defensive line, tight end, boom, 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 and check off all three in the first couple of rounds. And that was even before they took a corner at number 20 overall. So like, it sort of ended up the way you thought it would. I mean, they got 2 out of 3 with RJ Harvey and Savon Jones, and tight end was the one where the board just didn't really line up. I mean, there was no way, once they took Barron at 20, there just was no way they were going to get a running back and a tight and Mason Taylor, let's say, on day 2. Terrence Ferguson, like, great for him. He went to the Rams, like, I think earlier than probably expected. Just the quality tight ends actually dried up pretty fast. They could have taken Gunnar Helm, I think, in the 4th at one point. And so, that's kind of, it's the draft happens that way, right? It's happened that way at tackle for the Broncos every year since 2017. But like it happens that way at some positions, some years. It happened that way for the Broncos at tight end this year. And it just happened that was sort of the need that they had that got left out in the cold, besides obviously the lottery ticket with Caleb Lohner in the 7th round, which actually is like a pretty fun one.
Yeah, that was a fun one. I mean, I just, again, I don't, it's just where they got stuck, and you just pointed out, and Luca, you guys have described it. They were just far enough back in the 2nd round. They were kind of in this no man's land that to move way up, you're probably going to overpay, and you have to really love. So, because to get in on a Travion Henderson or Judkins, you're going to have to move up to the top of the 2nd round. And now you're basically saying we're probably not going to get a defensive end, or we're probably like you're not going to get other things you need. So yeah, it was a tough spot. It still surprises me. Peyton have earned the benefit of the doubt. They've had a couple of really good drafts. So I'm not going to sit here and say they don't know what they're doing. It's just very clear to me that Sean Payton loves his current group of receivers, tight ends, all those guys way better than the external public. That's fine. That's his right. They got to go prove it. That's what 10's the floor for this team, 10 wins. And so the AFC is not getting any easier. And we'll do rapid fire, Danny. Bring them all back on with Luca and Parker here. I want to get their best pick and their sleepers as we finish this podcast up. I'm joined again by Parker Gabriel from the Post and Luca Evans from the Post. So, guys, because I don't want to take too much of your time, we'll start with you, Luca. Your best pick and the sleeper pick of this draft for the Broncos. Go.
I think we already talked about the Barron pick. I think that's a good pick. I'll look at Harvey. I think honestly, I think second round surprised some people, but I keep kind of coming back mentally to how much, George Payton and Sean Payton talked throughout the draft process of, how close guys are in some grades and in some tiers. And, if you take a guy that if you're sitting at this spot, he might be similar to someone at this spot. And I wonder if that applies to, when you're thinking about Travion Henderson and RJ Harvey and kind of that whole class of backs that can play in space. Because to me, Troy, you were just talking about, it would take a lot to jump up, into the top of the second round from 51. And, to me, I think it would make sense that Denver had a similar enough grade or not enough of a discrepancy between Travion and RJ Harvey that they felt comfortable sitting 51 and then even moving back to get him. And I think when you look at his profile, again, like there is some pass catching upside. He had really, really good production for a couple years at UCF. He's got legit speed. He can play in the open, field. And I think he just makes a lot of sense. And when you're, if they do like Audric Estime that much, in terms of, the year 2 leap that he could make and kind of thinking about a tandem, I think him paired with Harvey makes a lot of sense. So I would say that biggest sleeper, I'm going to go loner. It's just truly a baffling pick. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. It's just, the guy played 57 snaps. Last year at Utah, he did not play football. He has not played football outside of last year at Utah since 7th grade. He was a basketball player. He started a couple years at BYU. Like it's just a incredible, funny story. But I do think, you look at some of his plays in the red zone last year, he has legitimate size. He has legitimate box out ability. And, who's I'm not saying he's the next Jimmy Graham or Antonio Gates, like you said, Troy, but, maybe in a couple of years, he picks things up enough to be because you can't teach that size. You can't teach a 40-inch vertical, and maybe there's some fun to be had there. So, I'd go with that.
If he's a red zone threat, then the pick makes sense. I doubt it's this year, but even in years in the future, he's fresh. Like you said, he hasn't played football. He's played 1 year of football since 7th grade. Got a lot of tread on the tire. Parker, your best pick, your biggest sleeper of this draft class.
Yeah, he's not going to be Antonio Gates or Jimmy Graham, but he is going to be Julius Thomas. So
there you go. I covered Julius.
He's obviously probably the most interesting pick of the draft. I tend to agree with Luca on Harvey as the best pick, but I'll switch it up and say Savon Jones. I mean, to me, like that's an aggressive move. It's basically the same move that the Broncos made last year for Troy Franklin. They just did it at the end of day 2 instead of the beginning of day 3. They didn't think he was going to get there, and he did. You can't, the size and the athleticism is really enticing. And then I think you're putting him in a perfect position where he's got, Zach Allen and Malcolm Roach and John Franklin Myers and DJ Jones like that. And then Jamar Cain, who coached him for a year in 2022 like that. If you wanted to take a guy who you love the traits and you love the approach, to borrow another Jeff Legwold term, Legwold said that Savon Jones would be on his all red ass team. He just plays that way all the time. And so like that is a perfect incubator, I think, with the group that you've got in place there to take a guy who, George Payton said he's our kind of player, put him in there for a year and see how much progress he can make in a year. And then, if it's John Franklin Myers is gone, Malcolm Roach is gone, both in 26, maybe you've got a guy who's sort of ready-made to put in that spot. So I think that's a really good pick. And then as a sleeper, I'll take Q Robinson. I mean, he's a special teams guy. He's a little bit undersized. The 57 snaps for Caleb Lohner is incredible. Q Robinson played 370 defensive snaps in his career at Alabama. I mean, that's, and you can look at that two ways. Maybe he was never good enough to be, to play that much defensively. I mean, front seven at Alabama is pretty good. So, I think that's a worthy flyer to take in the 4th round and say, this guy's going to be a demon for us on special teams. And one of the things that George Paton has shown real ability for, among several, but one of the things that he really has an eye for, I think, as a scout, is pass rush ability and pass rush upside. I mean, they've hit over and over again on mid-round picks as pass rushers, 2nd to 7th round. And so to me, it's like, yeah, he's a special teams guy. Maybe he never amounts to more than that. If that's the case, then a 4th round pick isn't like a giant investment. But you take a guy who you like the traits, hasn't played a lot of defense, you put him on special teams, and then you see what happens over the course of a year or two, pass rush wise. And maybe in a couple of years, you're sitting there saying like, wow, yeah, they saw the traits they liked, and then they went and they developed them.
Yeah, and the one thing about Savon Jones is I think he just turned 21. He's really young, so the idea that his best football is ahead of him is realistic. Audric Estime turned 21 last September, so the idea that his best football, like some of these guys, when you take them that young, coming into the NFL at age 20 is really difficult. I covered Ronnie Hillman did that. God rest his soul. He passed. He was on the Super Bowl team. His first few years in the league, he's just too young. He just wasn't ready to be a pro yet. He came in he was the youngest guy in the NFL for a couple of years, and he just wasn't ready, but he got better and better. So some of it, is they're seeing a vision for players 2 and 3 years down the road. And it's fair now. It makes more sense as they're competitive. It was harder when, you'd say, oh, this guy had 3 years or 4 years. Like, you got to get competitive at some point. Like, stop. Then you become the Rockies. You're just telling me, well, I've got all these really good guys. Well, you got to be able to field a current team that's competitive, and the Broncos have accomplished that. They're back in the playoffs. It's an interesting draft. If you're right on Harvey and Luca and Parker are right on Harvey, this draft's going to look great. If Harvey has trouble getting on the field and Omarion Hampton runs for 1,200 yards and 12 touchdowns, again, that's the fun of this. That's the fun of the draft. It's the fun of the draft, and Peyton has earned the benefit of the doubt. He's made a lot of right decisions. I guess in my own mind, I thought he was going to be a little more Bo-centric in the draft. And like you say, Parker, sometimes you got to listen to what they say, even though you just assume they're lying in terms of the draft. The best help for Bo is bulking up the defense. Vance Joseph is happy. I know that for a fact.
Yeah.
He's got a legit defense. You guys are the best. Again, this Parker Gabriel, Luca Evans of the Denver Post. If you want to go back and look at all the draft coverage, like round by round, features on every guy, in-depth feature is certainly on Jahdae Barron. More coming on the way. We've got rookie minicamp coming up. And in the schedule release date, guys, is what, May 14th? Do I have that date right? And so, I mean, we're fingers crossed. We're hoping for a game in London and/or Germany. Is that's what we're rooting for now?
Yeah, sign me up for Berlin, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we're going to end up in West Virginia. Take me home.
That's the Berlin. Yeah, Sulphur Springs is the Berlin of West Virginia.
Is the Berlin of West Virginia. See? Guys, you're the best. Thank you. Follow them at thedenverpost.com/sports Broncos. Broncos country. Again, I could not do this pod without Mile High Sports. Danny Bailey's behind the screen. He's a dead ringer for their new punter, Jeremy Crawshaw. So if you see him around town faking an Australian accent to get beer, that's Danny. He's the best. Nate Lundy at Mile High Sports. And, of course, Darby Hoggatt at Hoggatt Injury Law. Broncos country, I do this pod for you. Happiness that begins with me. Go out there and have a great day.